So, my private religious schooling series has had interesting reception. So far, I've shown a number of tests and a Bob Jones University textbook, and the common reaction people seem to have is being completely horrified. Even my fundamentally religious viewers seem to consider the material grossly outside the realm of reason, which has led to a number of questions. One of which I've been asked repeatedly is how I escaped this indoctrination, despite having been firmly entrenched from a young age. Well, I'm still on painkillers and between doctor's appointments, so what better time to make a video talking about that? Probably actually is the best time since it's not as depressing. The process of gradually shifting positions was a very long one that took a little under a decade, and I still think that's more of a lifelong process anyway, but I think the biggest single event that made me realize something was very wrong and set me on the path of discovery was an incident with my high school math teacher. I think I was 15 when this happened. He had often interrupted math lessons to talk about personal stories of his. Despite standing in front of the whiteboard and blocking the view, he'd still get upset people weren't copying down notes. One of his little stories was about him and a couple of his friends finding a cat with a few kittens. I'll spare you the details. The punchline is the adult cat was maimed and one of the kittens was killed. I didn't find his story amusing and didn't laugh at it. Instead, I quietly stared at him. At the time, my family had 2 dogs and I had adopted 2 cats. Many people wanted a small cute puppy or kitten, so little me figured often adult animals wouldn't find homes, so I added 2 cats to the family. Despite having been taught that homosexuals deserve the death penalty, I was still very fond of animals, and I didn't find a cat torturing story entertaining, and didn't indulge the supposedly funny manner in which the maiming was conducted. I discovered later, my lack of enthusiasm built a case against me possibly being a homosexual. The reasoning being I had a girly reaction more akin to the females in the class than the males, when it came to certain kinds of stories, and gender roles were pretty important. I also didn't seem all that interested in attending Christian events, so mixed with unenthusiasm, it stood to reason I was perhaps gay and harboring anti-Christian sentiments, which led to homosexuality accusations because of non-masculine behavior mixed with what appeared to be lack of interest in Christian activities. The real reason I didn't partake in things that weren't mandatory was because my grandmother was in declining health and my mother had to work, so I had to go home to take care of her. My social interactions were video games because Battlefield 2, Call of Duty 1 and 2, Command & Conquer Generals, and Age of Mythology didn't require me to leave the house, but it's not like anyone was going to ask if I had real responsibilities to tend to. Bureaucratically, there's strong incentive to cut corners if it'll make money or reduce effort spent. I mentioned previously my middle school and high school had no nurse. Why would a student want a nurse? Don't they trust God with their health? It becomes very easy to justify certain lines of reasoning if there's benefit in doing so, especially in poorer areas with less oversight. Often the agenda for managing incidents is whatever's fastest and cheapest, so there's little incentive to invest the effort in verifying when you can instead just chain together assumptions. That's faster and requires less effort. Why should they ask if someone has other responsibilities and can't come to a fundraiser? That's a waste of time. He's already exhibiting behavior a Christian boy shouldn't be having. Animal sacrifices happen all the time in the Bible. Why would he act differently when it comes to such subjects? There's no reason a Christian boy should be concerned with their treatment. Maybe he's a homosexual, and what's he doing in a Christian school anyway? That was the logic presented when the gay accusations occurred. It's supposed to be taken as reasonable at face value. I was too busy taking care of my grandmother to participate outside school hours, so that was a compelling case against me because I didn't react as affably to animal torture as a Christian boy apparently should have. I don't harbor any resentment for the religious, though. I've seen similar corner-cutting happen throughout many organizations, including among atheists. There were other incidents, but that was the first that made me seriously scrutinize the establishment. The final straw that made me decide I needed to not return to the school the following year was an incident with a principal. I briefly touched on this some time ago, I think in my first diary video. There was a theft chain that was going on. In a private conversation, I expressed a concern about the school's ability to control it. We had most of the lockers outdoors near the street, where the students were dropped off, and the lockers weren't big enough, so a lot of people's belongings were being left out near the lockers right by the road. I had the idea of relocating the lockers to an area a thief wouldn't be able to get to and leave as quickly, but I never got to present my case. The reaction to my privately expressed concern was the principal yelled at me for not having enough faith in Jesus, being a doubting Thomas, and his parting words before storming off were, "If you don't trust Jesus, what are you even doing here? Maybe we should get rid of you. Don't bring this up again." I considered privately expressing a concern in the interest of providing a possible solution, to have been something that were I in the principal's position, would have expected from people loyal, not treacherous. Because I was repaid with a threat to expel me, that was the final straw and made me decide not to return the following year. Before that, in the cat torturing incident, there were many I was not the victim of, but witnessed and didn't think were handled reasonably. I saw 3 girls scarlet-lettered for taking a couple sips of whiskey in the bathroom, and having to apologize in front of the school assembly or face expulsion, and several cases of classmates mysteriously not returning to school shortly after discussing potential mental issues. The school wasn't very large. I think it had somewhere around 120 students, and it shrunk to around 100 in under a year. There was a case where I was stopped for a water inspection to make sure I hadn't brought alcohol on campus, and another where a student was expelled for allegedly smelling kind of weird and acting kind of weird, and this was evidence he was smoking marijuana on the weekend and guilty of anti-Christian activities. There was no drug test and no trial, merely assumptions piled on other assumptions. The situation, as my 15-year-old self perceived it, was that the principal or some higher figure had gone off the deep end with paranoia and saw the shadow of Satan in every backpack, and the paranoid purges were the result. Whether the principal's reaction to my private concern was what would have happened had any other student done the same, or was instead a result of the charges against me for non-masculine reaction to animal maiming, I don't know for sure. The cat torture incident wasn't the only one in which I had not displayed Christian enthusiasm, but it was the one that caused me to be accused of being a homosexual, and was the one that made me decide the math teacher shouldn't have power over anyone. I couldn't help but wonder what would have become of him had the cat's owner caught him in the act, or were he maiming one of my cats, what would have become of him. Though the purges are a subject for another video, it was the fact I looked down on supposed authority figures as disgusting that provoked investigation. I later left my church because a similar purge started there as well. I understood that something was deeply flawed about the way I had been taught to view the world, though the teenage me did not yet understand to what extent. From there, things gradually shifted as I set about undoing the damage that I was aware had been done. That's most of how I escaped. I'll probably address the purges in a future video. So, there you have it. Thanks for listening to my story. I'll see you next time.